Parliament passing the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill. It makes major changes around policies, around language, around sex education and other issues in our schools. But the bill also fairly contentious. Opposition parties voted against the bill. Other groups say it won't necessarily improve education for children. Karabo Ozah is the director of the Centre for Child Law at the University of Pretoria. Karabo, good afternoon to you. Do you believe the Bela Bill is going to improve education for children? I realise, as always in education, you're going to have arguments in lots of different directions. Do you think what was passed is going to make schools better in any way?
Well, thank you for having me, Stephen. The first starting point is that some of the amendments that has now become an act are things that had to be done to align with, for instance, judgments of the Constitutional Court. You know, it's like 30 years after now the Constitution, and reflecting on how far we've come in education provision. And there's been a lot of issues that are a challenge, for instance, issues pertaining to admission into schools and policies that excluded children who didn't have documents. All those things are now addressed in the Act, and they're addressed in a way that is clear. No Act obviously can be perfect. So as a starting point, I would say there are quite a lot of provisions in there that are an improvement that will actually give clarity and direction in relation to quite a number of issues. Obviously, there are some issues that people are not happy about. We had seen that right through the whole process of, submissions and the hearings, that there are people who are not happy about, particularly the issues pertaining to the powers of the school governing bodies and such. So, as you say, we all have different views about what we think about the bill. But I would say that, obviously the provisions are meant to do certain things, but they are not the only vehicle for change and for some of the challenges that we see in relation to implementation and actually really going towards the realization of the rights to education on a more equitable footing for children in South Africa.
You made several submissions about the bill, and from what I could see, specifically about admitting children to school. Some children don't have documents, some don't have parents or guardians. They're literally, trying to bring themselves up. Did the department take your submissions into account?
Yes, so some of the provisions, particularly in relation to the documents that are required for admission. So they are listed, the documents that are required for different categories of children, non-South African children. But later then in the bill, in the Act itself, there are provisions for exemptions. So for instance, for saying, if you don't have these documents, you will still be allowed and your family is given time to get documents, which is something that we had made submissions on, because if you don't do that, it means you're going back even on the judgment that came out a few years ago to say that we shouldn't have issues of documentation being a barrier to access to education for children. And that was also reflecting or reflective of the lived reality that not all children, actually, even South African children, have birth certificates timeously when they apply to schools.
Is it possible now that some children can almost be left out of the system? So some people can't go to school because of something in this bill, because of something to do with documentation? Or does the situation that we have now make sure that every child, regardless of their circumstances, where their parents come from, is actually able to go to school and proper education?
Well, to be able to be admitted, yes, the bill does cover that. As I say, initially we were worried that they were listing and there were no rules for making exceptions, and saying that if you don't have documents, you will still be admitted. So insofar as that being on paper, it's reflective of what we had achieved through the courts and through the court judgments. However, implementation remains a challenge. Even with the court judgment that we had a few years ago, every year in January, we had to be writing to schools about not excluding learners because of issues of document. So we are, as we become known as South Africa, we're very good at really reflecting very human rights-based approaches in our legislation. But where we fail is really making sure that we implement across the board in a way that doesn't leave any children behind. So that will still be the challenge that we have to see and monitor on the ground.
One of the big issues that you've been campaigning on for a long time, Karabo, you've gone to court several times over to school infrastructure, what's called the norms and standards policy, what schools should have in classes. Some schools still using pit latrines, things like that. Is the department making progress on this? This has been a big, big battle for a long, long time.
Yes, so I mean, today we had a short launching of two small reports that we actually undertook the process to research to kind of track how far have we come since we started litigation, and not only the Center for Childhood, there are a lot of our partners who work in this area. And since 2008, we've done a lot of campaigns, litigation to try and actually shift the needle in relation to eradicating inadequate infrastructure, access to sanitation, water, and all those things. So the reports we launched today were really about reflecting about how far we've come, but also asking the difficult questions, which we inherited a certain legacy as a country, because of how during apartheid schools were funded based on race and stuff. But can we still now, after 30 years, say that is still the biggest obstacle? And we were discussing today, one of the things that most of us agreed on is that it is becoming now that you cannot use that as an excuse. There's been a lot of over the years funding going to education, and actually education spending has been one of the biggest spending by government. However, we take one step forward, one step backwards, particularly in relation to the eradication of inadequate school infrastructure. So we're tracking the provinces, tracking how in some provinces the money is sent to provinces to actually with a special grants to eradicate inappropriate school infrastructure, but then funds are sent back to Treasury and how those monies are lost over the years. And now we're reflecting about what can we do, because we keep seeing those things. And once the money goes back from Eastern Cape, where you need to eradicate mud schools, and Treasury takes it back, it's lost for those children. So we were thinking about how do we now advocate going forward. Also, then the norms and standards, one of the things, Stephen, that we were talking about today is the fact that as much as the Bela Bill has been passed, at the same time, there has been a process by DBE to try and amend the norms and standards, and particularly one of the proposals there was to take away the timeframes for eradicating these inappropriate school infrastructure, something that obviously as a sector we vehemently opposed to. So you see, we have a bill that's trying to be progressive on some elements, but on the one hand, DBE is trying to say we need 30 more years to eradicate inadequate school infrastructure, which we shouldn't be something that we allow. And definitely we have a lot of work still to do to push back against all these.
I mean, Karabo, if you look at the demographic projections in South Africa's population in 30 years, the percentage of the number of children in school will probably start to fall down, probably start to go down. I mean, the department has had a long time to sort this out. The president in 2018 said he would make sure that there were no more pit latrines, and yet here we are.
No, most definitely. And the banner under which we were reflecting today was accountability, and how do we push for more accountability? So that is the thing. And the minute you remove those provisions for timelines in relation to providing or eradicating inadequate school infrastructure, accountability goes out of the window. But you mentioned also the dropping numbers of learners in schools. And we know that even before COVID and then more so during COVID and post-COVID, we saw the numbers of children in school dwindling, and for various reasons, accessibility issues, unfortunately some learners falling pregnant and not being able to come back to school. But we're also seeing things like, because of how in the past some schools were rationalized and closed, children have to go far distances to get to schools, and then funding for scholar transport not being provided. So there's a myriad of issues that are impacting on why there might be a decline in the number of learners in schools. But I mean, in the bill itself, in the Act, the Bela Act now, what we see there is that there is now a provision about holding schools accountable to try and trace why learners are not coming to school. It's going to be not an easy task to implement that, and I actually believe that we need to work with social development to address some of the barriers to education. So the social issues are definitely affecting access to education for children in a way that you have to always constantly be reflecting on how you're going to advance more and not let learners fall out of the system. I mean, we keep saying that, right to education is a gateway right to other rights. And we cannot then afford to have, less learners in our schools, because it means as a country, we're going down.
Karabo Ozah, thank you, Director of the Center for Child Law at the University of Pretoria.